Well, hello, my brilliant students and our brilliant guest and all these lovely humans. Today we are having a fabulous presentation called Rebelling the Right Way, Frances Wright's Practice of Feminist Utilitarianism with Madison Jackson, who I happen to know from my own graduate studies here at TWU. And she agreed to come give this presentation expanded from what she did in class. So she's put some extra work in just for anybody who is coming here to listen. On that note, there's not much more I will say. Just be sure to sign in. Stay tuned for the Q&A, for some bonus extra credit, and for the sign out sheet. And without any further ado, Madison, why don't you take over and let me just fall asleep? No, I won't fall asleep, but I do
I
need a nap. So, do you think Frances Wright would mind?
no, heck no. I think she would
Oh,
be,
okay.
if it brings you pleasure, that's what needs to happen. So that's yes.
I'm totally kidding. I'm taking detailed notes to not include it on the test because I already have the test written. So,
Oh my goodness. No, I support all of the above. I really do. Like I am the kind of person where I hope folks feel comfortable to show up the way that they need to and that they're feeling at that point. And so I support all of the above, which that does mean for me, I just want y'all to know I do love interruptions. I love questions. Please don't hesitate to unmute. I really fully support that. Drop things in the chat and I'll try to get back to them. But I really am hoping that this can be something that's interactive. Yes, there's content that will be lecture based, but I'm going to pause at certain points to be like, what do y'all think about this? And ooh, what does that make you think about that? And towards the end, we have an activity if we have time. And if we don't, it's all cool. And also, it needs to be consensual. And if we take a vote and we're like, yeah, I'm not really feeling the activity, we'll see. Yeah, so I'm excited to get started. Like Bonnie Jean said, this was something that actually one of our assignments in our class for our PhD level classic sociological theory. We had to find alternative texts around utilitarianism, and I was like, okay, listen, we're learning about all these men, all of these, let's be honest, all these white men who are like, founders of sociology, which cool. I mean, great minds, but also there were absolutely women, amazing people of color, women of color during that time who did amazing things, and they also deserve to be learned about and taught and talked about. And so Frances Wright was just someone that I found in the utilitarianism tradition. And so it was really exciting to get to learn more. So I hope that you'll have fun learning about her today. And I hope that y'all will feel comfortable laughing at some of the things that I put in there because, that's just how my brain works. So if you have like little emojis that you want to drop in as a reaction or in the chat, or if you're just like want to unmute and be like, wow, that was really silly and nerdy, but we respect it, I'm all for it. So let's get started. So today for our presentation, I just want everyone to know kind of like, so you kind of know some checkpoints or some markers so you know how far along we are. The content is about 30 minutes and then we have time for the activity and questions and everything. But if we end a little bit sooner or, if people have a lot of questions and they want to stay a little bit longer, I'm here for whatever. I just want to respect y'all's time. But the big learning objectives or the big bullet points that we have for us today is that hopefully by the end of this presentation, folks will be able to define utilitarianism and feminism. We will learn about Frances Wright's philosophy around these and how she built her practices and her life around this. And then our last thing is that we're going to be building some dreams for the future the right way. Um, and of course, Wright is a play on her last name. There is no right or wrong when it comes to your own personal experiences and methods for your own utilitarianism or feminism. But it's just a play on words. So I just want to make sure that people don't feel like I'm like trying to be like, no, it has to be one way. So it's just a little fun little pun. Um, so before we get into Frances Wright, I wanted to kind of just lay some foundation for what utilitarianism is. So it was a philosophy and ethical just modality that was developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism at its core is just the belief that an action is right if it promotes happiness and pleasure. It is wrong if it produces pain or unhappiness. The biggest goal is that it's trying to create the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, one thing I will say is that it sounds beautiful and it can be very utopian, very magical because the goal is that we're trying to create good for all. But there have been a lot of critiques of utilitarianism throughout like its inception and then, throughout time, just that like ultimately there is this argument or like, it's kind of like the trolley car problem that people try to put out there, or where people are like, okay, so if you're trying to say that as long as it's for the greater good, it doesn't matter what harm it causes. Like a lot of people, when talking about utilitarianism, will use the example of, say that one person walks into a hospital and there are four people in the hospital waiting for organ transplants. Well, then technically, if the doctors seize and murder that man and to give his organs to the people who are waiting for transplants, technically it's utilitarianist because it's creating the greatest good for the greatest number. And so there's some people who have seen it as a way to argue some problematic things in society. So it is something that you want to really be careful of whenever you're talking and learning about it, just thinking critically about how ultimately, whenever it's really in practice and whenever it's in partnership with other healthy, ethical, and philosophical, thoughts, it's something that can be a really great foundation for our ethics and our philosophy, but just something to think critically about depending on its application. Um, the last thing about it is that it is a branch of consequentialism. So basically, that actions should be evaluated based on the impact of their outcomes. So the consequentialism is kind of a more modern or more recent addition to this branch of sociology, because once again, the original thoughts really did not consider the impact of harm. So now we try to understand how can we combine utilitarianism with consequentialism so that we are understanding its impact and also trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number, but with the least harm. Um, so one little blurb that I just wanted to put on here, that we got to watch a magical video in our class about, but this little picture thing on the right over here is a picture of um, Jeremy Bentham's auto icon. So no pressure, because I totally did not know what this was and did not know it existed. But does anyone know what an auto icon is, or has anyone interacted with Jeremy Bentham's auto icon before? It's Bonnie Jean. You're like, me. No, okay, getting some no's. That's okay, because legit, I was like, I have no idea what this is. Yeah, kind of like, yeah, some kind of performance a little bit. Yeah, yeah. So Jeremy Bentham was a pretty kooky dude. He was kind of creepy in his thoughts for how he wanted his body to be used after he passed. And so in his will, he specifically donated his body to science, which he really he thought that, donating our bodies to science was utilitarianist because hopefully would bring about studies that would bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of understanding different parts of the, human mechanism. Well, he also said, though, that after that was done, he would like for his body to be mummified and then put on display to where people could interact with it and, just get to hang out with him if they wanted to. So, in that process, it didn't go so well, in the sense that his skin did not mummify well. So now all they have is his like original skull and his head, and you can actually go and visit the auto icon. And it's a stuffed body, so it's just a regular like mannequin stuffed body, but then the head is actually contains the skull of Jeremy Bentham. The university that it's at, apparently there's students who have totally pranked and kidnapped Jeremy Bentham's auto icon and placed in spots and stuff like that. But it's just a very unique and interesting way to consider like, hey, not only am I hopefully adding good to science by donating my body for like research, but also he thought, you know what, maybe people will get a laugh out of it. Maybe they'll have some fun with it. So he wanted every single part of himself, while he was alive and after he passed, to bring some type of pleasure to the masses. And so people take pictures with it and stuff. I'll be honest, I was like, ooh, that's not my jam. I will not be visiting that. But hey, there are absolutely some people who think it's really cool, and I support that. So I just want to let folks know that if you ever want to get to know him on a more intimate level, you can totally go visit his auto icon. No pressure, but I would love to see emoji in the chat of how y'all feel about that. So an emoji that represents how you're feeling about his auto icon, would love to see in the chat. Um, any questions or thoughts so far? I'm loving the emojis. Yeah, some curiosity, some like, oh my goodness, what? Yeah, those are my reactions too. And I mean, hey, you know what? I support it. It's just not my jam. So, but if anyone ever goes and visits, I need you to report back because I need to know. I definitely want to know. So, thank you for those emojis. They were fun. So that's the first piece of utilitarianism is the first piece that we're really going to talk about. But then something I really wanted to make sure, I'm sure a lot of folks know what feminism is. You have your own definition, your own way that you interact with it or don't interact with it. But I wanted to make sure that no matter what, we all are kind of just moving forward with the same definitions together. And so feminism for us today, the original definition, or like maybe the original intention of the definition, is the concept that it's social, economic, and political equality of all genders. The original definition said all sexes, but as we progressed and understood the expansion of gender and sexuality and things like that, we can say all genders. Um, so it's really important to note this really is trying to push forward the concept that women and people of minoritized genders have historically been disenfranchised, discriminated against. Systems have built oppression to make sure that these groups experience inequality. And so it really started off with the women's movement. But I wanted to bring in, because it will be relevant later, intersectional feminism. This is really the one that we're going to focus on today. So, how many of y'all have learned about Kimberly Crenshaw, or have y'all learned about intersectionality yet? And it's totally okay to drop in the chat or unmute, either way. Yes, a little bit. Okay. Your roommate has. They are currently losing their mind. Yay! I support them. Um, so, some of us, maybe even if we've heard it kind of as a buzzword, or maybe we've, like really delved into it. I will highly recommend Kimberly Crenshaw has a phenomenal TED Talk that really helps us understand her political theory around intersectionality. So I won't go into super depth with it today, but the big thing about it is it's a feminism, intersectional feminism recognizes that we want social, economic, and political equity of all. And the reason why we're kind of shifting that definition is because when we think of equality, it means everyone gets the exact same thing. But if everyone gets the exact same thing, there's going to be some people who need things that are a little bit different. So equity means that we're actually trying to figure out ways that we can reconstruct society and systems and understandings to make sure that everyone gets what they need. Like for me, I like to think of it as like if you're thinking about a cactus plant or like different types of plants, if you water all of them the same and give them the same amount of sunshine or the same amount of, air or temperature, there will be some plants that don't thrive as well as others because some of them need less water, some of them need more sunshine, some of them need shade, some of them need whatever it might be. And so equity really is this concept where everyone is able to have access to and has the ability to live the life that they need and deserve by getting exactly what they need. And once again, the only reason why I crossed out genders is just because this intersectionality is trying to consider the equity of all. So this really is trying to include everyone based on anything, race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, any identity that we see in society. So I really wanted to bring this in because I want everyone to kind of know this because as we start to talk about Frances Wright, you'll see that she was someone who today would be considered an intersectional feminist because she was someone who absolutely fought for women's rights, but she was an abolitionist. She was someone who believed in ending slavery. And was someone who wanted education and access for all. She truly wanted all human beings to be able to live a educated and happy full life. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had this definition in there. Uh, Oh yeah, thank you, Bonnie Jean, for posting that. Thank you so much. Um, but yeah, that TED Talk is phenomenal. So I am going to pause really quick. Any thoughts or questions at all so far? Like anything that you want to drop in the chat or unmute? I see some raise the roof for equity. Woo woo. Yes. Oh yeah, the poster about the fundamental rights. It's one of my favorites that I see at so many different like movement meetings or protests and stuff. It's because it's such a fun play. I love puns, obviously. So I'm like, yes, Cyndi Lauper. We all just want fundamental rights. Um, and so yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and move on. But even if like two slides later you have a question on something like this, don't hesitate to at least drop it in the chat because it's either something that we can address towards the end or it's something that will probably be relevant. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows just because I'm breezing through this doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, unmute, or drop in the chat at any time. So if we are learning about utilitarianism, feminism, intersectional feminism, we're going to learn about Frances Wright. So she was actually someone who lived in the early 1800s. Really interesting. She was Scottish born, orphaned as a young girl, and sent to live with her uncle, who was a professor of philosophy and lover of utilitarianism. And actually, through living with her uncle, she was able to be connected to a lot of different scholars of sociology, anthropology, and was exposed to so much content and life and history and experiences that it made her just have a huge love and hunger for learning about people and learning about cultures and learning about just what society could become in order to make sure that everyone is happy and has what they need. So as she was growing up and she had exposure to that, eventually she started to write her own material and her own academic like lectures and books, and she moved to the Americas and lived the rest of her life out there. She's recognized as the first woman in the US to speak on women's equality, like even before some of the other folks that we might know. I want to say once again, the reason why it says recognized, or maybe she's the first like recorded woman necessarily to speak on women's equality, is just because we know that there are other women who maybe did not have their content or what they were saying recorded, or maybe they were women of color. Like specifically, I think about people like Sojourner Truth, who were also around this time, an amazing Black woman who um, got her freedom after being enslaved. The big Sojourner Truth speech about Ain't I a Woman, also phenomenal thing to read. I just want to acknowledge that there were many other people and women at this time who were speaking out. She's just kind of recognized as the first woman to be recorded for that, or like maybe be more public for it. Um, so, like I said earlier, the big thing about her is that she was a feminist, an abolitionist, an anti-marriage advocate, which is really interesting because the reason why she was an anti-marriage advocate was not because she was like, oh, I hate marriage. It was actually that she saw it as a way of economically entrapping women. And so she really believed that until that institution could be reshaped and have more of a consensual and equal power structure, she didn't believe in the economic institution of marriage. So she really promoted and like tried to teach women about like how to fight for economic rights. Women couldn't own property, all that different business. And so just trying to have that conversation around how marriage was a benefit to men, but not always for women. She was a critic of religion. She was educated on different types of religion. She was just known for speaking out against the church and its ways of sexism at the time and racism, and how religion justified at the time justified slavery and sexism around her. And then the last thing is that she is a promoter of liberated love and sexuality. So she really did believe she had a lot of contact with French theorists and French philosophers and other folks from Europe because she was Scottish and people in America that she and they just really believed that anyone should be able to love who they love, but that sexuality and sex in general should be free. So that it should not require an economic institution like marriage, and that as long as it's safe and within practice, it's something that should be just like freely available to everybody. The interesting thing about that is that she totally had a secret saucy love affair with the Marquis de Lafayette. And yes, I do mean the one from Hamilton. Um, so I mean, I will say she definitely loved Marquis de Lafayette at that time. And if she saw Daveed Diggs now, she'd be like, heck yes. She'd be like, even better, because let's be honest, he's hotter between the two, in my opinion. But going back to that though, it's really important to note that like that's not the biggest thing about her. It's just a fun fact, kind of an interesting thing. He really was more of a philosophy mentor to her, but they did have a time where they had a relationship, and that's really where she gained a lot of her understandings around marriage and love and sexuality. So it's just an interesting fact, but it's not something that we necessarily want to know. That's not the only thing we need to know about her because we don't want to focus only on her romance. But her works included poetry, lectures, pamphlets, published journals. Her most famous work is A Few Days in Athens. A lot of people use this in courses, or they use this to kind of talk about early days of utilitarianism and feminist utilitarianism. So it's a great text, but there are other texts out there that like if you are more of like a micro learner and you want to learn poetry or like just maybe read some of her lectures, those are really great options as well. The last thing about her is that she provided contributions to utilitarianist and feminist philosophy around sexism, classism, and racism. So she's a pretty cool human. Um, okay, cool. I'm glad I got some laughs. I got some laughs for the Marquis de Lafayette and Hamilton. Um, so yeah, so for her utilitarianism, since it's something, just as a refresher, that it's about, we want things that bring pleasure, reduce things that bring pain, greatest good for the greatest number. Her big thing is that actions are morally right if they promote happiness and equality. So she really believed that utilitarianism wasn't just about pleasure, it was about equality because there could not be joy or there could not be liberated joy without equality. And today I feel like she would probably transition the words to equity. She believed that this happens through education and interconnectedness of all humans and their experiences, knowledge, and fully recognize humanity, including race, gender, ethnicity, etc. She really believed that everyone should be learning together. She believed in abolishing slavery to where we had integrated communities, integrated schools, to where everyone had the same access to resources and education. And she believed that if we had that and people got to know each other and spend time with each other, then we would have the ultimate happiness because we would know ourselves better than we ever expected because we got to know other people better than we expected. So it's a really cool philosophy. And then also that ultimately it's a philosophy with the goal of social change that will bring a utopian and utilitarian future. So she really did believe that we could get there someday. And, it's okay to also be a little cynical and be like, I don't know if we ever could. And that's all right to have those thoughts. But just knowing that she had that vision, it gives me some hope that, I think those are things that we can strive for. I have a quote here from her that says, the universal and equal improvement of the condition of all. That really I wanted to highlight from one of her lectures, where she was talking about how abolition and ending slavery is just going to be a huge part of how we will improve all of society, and how all women will benefit as well. Like she was talking to a group of women, so she was saying that all women will benefit if all women are free. So I just really appreciated that quote. Um, so the second thing that was a really big part of her utilitarianism was education. She was like a huge education advocate. Think someone kind of like Montessori without having the pedagogy. She really wanted to promote schooling and pedagogies that were inclusive and accessible. She said education is the way to gain happiness and equality. This must happen not just through traditional schooling, but through observation, exposure, and experience. So once again, she definitely would love someone like Montessori because she really believed that people needed to like children needed to play together, children needed to read together, children needed to like go visit each other's houses, like and that education isn't just reading from a book or isn't just, having lectures like this. She really believed that it was like, everyone being able to have access to learning other cultures, tasting food, all these different things. And so she really thought that schooling should be an like super integrative experience, not just a retention of information. She said education for women and people of color is crucial to the advancement and overall liberated joy of society as a whole. The way that she talked about this, one of the quotes that I love that she says is she says, the mind has no sex, but what habit and education give it, to help us understand way before we were really talking about this, gender is a construct. Like even our concept of sex, like their constructs or social constructs, excuse me, social constructs, which means that we made it up, and it's something that can liberate us, but it's also something that can restrict us. And so if we have more education, then we learn more opportunities, and we can learn how if we created this construct, it can get bigger, it can grow, it can expand. And so everyone can have an experience that is truly theirs and truly authentic and truly happy. Um, and so she talked about this along with, her thoughts around abolitionist education as well. So the last piece of her puzzle on the way that her utilitarianism works is she also believed in interconnectedness. So for her, interconnectedness of knowledge, experience, and truth is a communal and collaborative endeavor. This meant across race and gender, and this she believed it would build empathy, therefore the pleasure of true morality. So she once again, like whenever she said interconnectedness, this was her word at the time for integration, meaning that everyone, like slavery should be abolished, everyone should be living in communities together, everyone should be working together, everyone should be getting to know each other. Um, because if we can get to know each other, then we'll build empathy and like humanize each other versus whenever we're isolated in our own communities, whether it is based on religion or race or gender or other things like that. When we're isolated, it's easy for us to stay in our bubbles and see others as other. But if we actually integrated and we lived in communities all together and worked together and saw how we strive together and learn together, that will build empathy and morality. She also believed that through abolishing slavery and empowering women, we would all be able to live together in harmony. This would bring forth the ultimate happiness of humankind through the integration of all races and genders and the reproduction of knowledge and humanity. So she was a huge advocate for interracial marriage, um, whenever she, because a lot of people, they did at the time still, marriage was a big goal for people. So she was a big advocate for if marriage is still going to be a thing, that absolutely anyone should be able to marry anyone. There should be integrated unions, because she believed in like having a human race where like basically we're all so connected that race isn't a thing anymore because while she did not have these words, race is also a social construct. And so for her, she believed that if we married each other, loved each other, were friends with each other, our kids play together. I keep saying this stuff over and over. But she really believed that if we could do this, then we could actually have a humanized, equitable society. And so in the book that I got a lot of this information from by Catherine Villanueva Gardner, she says, Wright argues without equality, there is no liberty. So that was just her big quote for why abolishing slavery was such a huge part of her work, is because it's kind of her way before, us learning about Audre Lorde saying, I am not free if any other woman is unfree. That was kind of how she felt too. She obviously didn't have those words, and Audre Lorde, amazing Black feminist that everyone should absolutely learn. So I see a lot of connections between things that Frances Wright said and did in her work and the way that we understand intersectional and Black feminism today. Um, so uh, so yeah. So before we get to this little piece, I'm gonna pause because I know I just dropped a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? Ooh, it's a great question. What was the general reaction to Francis? Um, that is a super awesome question, and you are so ahead of the game, so on point. I will show you here in a little bit, and that's what I'll say for now. But I'm gonna pin that so that way I can remember to answer that question. Um, but before I answer it, I just want to ask, what do y'all think the reaction was? Not positive, negative, probably not good. People did not like it. unpopular considering she was going against what people thought. Pitchforks, not good. Probably not very great. Unsure. Yeah. Yeah. So I will say all of you are right, which sounds weird, but we'll get into it. Um, but I will just say, like, she had a lot of protection. Honestly, being a white woman of privilege at that time, she came from a wealthy family. And so that really did protect her a lot to where it was more of like a, oh, you silly girl, like, oh, kind of like, oh, she's probably just hysterical type vibe. To where like there were other men and scholars who she was connected with that saw her as a brilliant mind and thought that she had really great, ideas and philosophies, and they really actually did want to prop her up academically. There were a couple people who invited her to be lecturers at their university whenever women were not allowed to lecture. They weren't allowed to be professors. So they even in that were rebelling in how they were like, okay, her thoughts need to be heard. And so while a lot of that was more in Europe, in Scotland and England, in the US, she still had the protection of being a wealthy white woman to where even though everyone around her in the US really was not supportive of her philosophies and the things that she talked about, and we'll see a little bit later how the US history looks at her now. But so it was a little balance of both, which I was actually very pleasantly surprised and I really appreciated, especially because Frances Wright isn't really a name that many of us learn. I want to acknowledge I did not know about her until, reading this book and learning in this class. And so it's definitely something where, it's an interesting place to sit in knowing that she had, both good and bad reviews. So her like Google reviews would be an interesting thing to see and look at her stars. But yeah, so in Europe, she was actually pretty well received. In the US, not so much. And it was because it really was around the time of like, the American Revolution and, slavery was booming the economy and things like that, not to justify it at all, but to explain they really thought she was going against what was American and like they thought that she was some foreigner trying to like change their American ways. So it's an interesting way to see that. Um, so thank you so much for that question. I appreciate y'all responding in the chat as well with, your thoughts and maybe what y'all thought the response was to her. So I really appreciate that. Um, so the last part that I'll say on her utilitarian feminism is that she really thought that all of this worked together. So her biggest ultimate goal was interconnected education. That was the big, big goal. So she believed having a public education system that was equally accessible and beneficial to everyone, regardless of race, gender, and class, with all learning happening together in the same place, integrated in family and community, it would liberate society and bring the greatest happiness to all. So, this final quote that I have here of hers says, equal rights must originate in equal condition. Equal condition must originate in equal knowledge and in brotherly sympathies. So at the time, this was her saying that like everyone deserves education, everyone deserves a happy and accessible life, a healthy life, and it deserves to be a place of empathy where everyone is supported. So she really did believe that everyone deserved this, and she really fought for that. Um, oh yeah, I forgot. I was like, so dang, I missed my cue. But she was like kind of an OG intersectional feminist. She was like way ahead of her time, super ahead of her time, and just was like really, excuse my language, but badass. She like really did a lot in her lifetime to build a platform that allowed us to talk about these things today. So she's someone to acknowledge and learn about, and her and Kimberly Crenshaw would totally be besties. I totally believe that. If she lived today, she would be like, "Oh my gosh, Kimberly Crenshaw, you're the best, and I just want to like pay for you to do all the things everywhere all the time." And Kimberly Crenshaw would be like, "Thanks, girl. Let's go do TED Talks together." She'd be like, "Okay." So I feel like, if Princess Wright lived today, I think she would, still be fighting for all these things. And I think if she could take a time machine and see where we're at today, we have so far to go. Things are not done. But I think she would be like, okay, maybe we can keep pushing towards this and we can get there. I think it would give her some hope. But she would be like, okay, yeah, but we got some stuff to do. We still have some stuff to do. So yeah. So the last thing that we're going to talk about with her before we do our activity, if we have time and if people want to, um, so the big thing that she did to try and show and like prove all of these philosophies that she had was she developed and founded a community called Neshoba in Tennessee. So it was from 1825 to 1830. It was a socialist emancipated community established by Francis Wright in Tennessee. The community consisted of white farm workers, white community members, as well as people who were freed people who had previously been enslaved, as well as people who were currently enslaved, because whether they were enslaved or not, she specifically wanted them to have a community where they got paid for their labor, even if someone else technically had their ownership, so that they could buy their way out of enslavement. And then live in this community. And so she worked with, unfortunately, owners of enslaved people to like basically buy out their contracts to where they could pay their way out of it. And then while they were in the community, they got a house. They had community food processes. They also had integrated schools. They also had integrated marriage and family and love connections. It was a community that was like kind of like this bubble in Tennessee where it was trying to show how ending enslavement will not impact the economy negatively, and that if people were supported, everyone could be a like happy, healthy part of society. So it hoped to create a utopian community where enslaved people could prepare for freedom through education and paid labor. It included formerly enslaved people, white laborers, and reform-minded settlers. Wright envisioned interracial cooperation and gender equality in work and education. Ultimately had to end. The community ended after 5 years due to challenges of funding and internal social struggles. So basically, they started off with private funds and then tried to get other funds to like support the community, but people did not support them and they were running out of money, like her money and other community members' money, and so they did not have money to just fund the community. And then the internal social struggles really were a couple things that happened that were nowadays we'd be like, okay, we could have done stuff to prevent that. But it was just some unhealthy power dynamics that were happening. And then outside community members would come in and burn houses, burn barns. So it was just a really hard place to live only because of the external experiences, not because the people who lived there didn't ultimately get along or that it wasn't a successful community. It was that like the world just wasn't ready for it. But anyone who was an enslaved person or someone who had been freed from Neshoba, she paid to move them to Haiti so that they could live out free lives. So if they were someone who was still enslaved at the end of the 5 years, she bought out their contracts and helped fund for anyone to move to Haiti so that they could live a free life. So while it was not perfect, it absolutely is something that we have to acknowledge some of the harms that happened, some of the dynamics that were there. It's not a perfect, idyllic little, situation. It was something that was started way ahead of its time and was trying really hard to show that something like this could happen. But unfortunately, just the world got to it and they were not able to be successful. So whenever you asked earlier, like, oh, like what was the response to her? I just want to point out I was shocked at all that there was a historical landmark sign at all in Tennessee for Neshoba, but this is the historical landmark sign. It says, to the south lay this plantation. Here, in 1827, a Scottish spinster heiress named Frances Wright set up a colony whose aims were, to, were the enforcement of cooperative living and other advanced sociological experiments. It failed in 1830. So I'm just going to be quiet for a minute. And if people feel comfortable um, uh, unmuting themselves, that would be awesome. But even in the chat, I just want to hear just reading that sign. What are your thoughts about it?
Um, I thought that the last sentence, it failed in 1830, was a little shady.
Mm, yeah, why?
I feel like they could have presented it a bit more gracefully, like maybe it ended or ceased in 1830 or something like that, but I feel like it kind of showed a bit of bias. in the writing.
Hmm. I agree with you 100%.
That would make a great premise for a paper, extra credit paper on this presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't here.
Yeah, Perry also says that sign is totally misrepresenting what happened. It's totally painting the blame on the community. Yeah, Tamia says, I agree with her. It does sound biased. Yeah, and to answer, Eric, to answer your question, my understanding is the reason it was established in Tennessee is because the land was very cheap and they were able to buy a little bit more isolated piece of land to where it was surrounded by forest so that maybe they were, because there were a lot of outside threats from people who did not agree with it and people who wanted to harm the community and its members. They tried to find something that was affordable, but also a little bit more isolated, just so that maybe there was a bit more safety. Um, that's my understanding. And then for Jillian, what was her family's reaction specifically to her ideals? Did they agree? And was she like a complete curveball to her family's ideal? Oh my gosh, great question. So my understanding, and once again, I am not trying to pretend like I'm an actual historian or expert on Frances Wright, but from what I have read, her family was very supportive of her. Her uncle specifically was very proud of her. And so all of her funds, she never married. And so all of her funds actually came from her uncle and from her family. So she was able to do a lot of this because of their support. Now, I will say I don't know how like outwardly supportive they were. Like I don't know if they were just like she's the best ever and like, but I do know that her uncle also attended a couple of her lectures. Her sister seems to be very quiet. She did have a younger sister. Tends to be pretty quiet, but we don't know why necessarily, or I should say that I don't know why necessarily yet because I have a lot more reading to do. So from what I understand, her family was pretty supportive, at least of her individually. So that's pretty great. Um, and something I just want to say about the sign is that, like, oh, and Daisy says it failed in 1830 shows that people at that time were very ignorant. Yeah. Because I mean, the fact is, or the reality is that is a fact. It's not wrong. It did technically fail in 1830, but it's not painting a full picture of what happened, why it failed, and the complexity around it. And once again, I'm not saying Neshoba was a perfect community at all. It was technically a social experiment, which meant that there were some things that happened that caused harm to some of the community members. There were things that happened that were not safe. And so I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to be like, oh, it's all, hippy dippy perfect. Because if we don't acknowledge those harms that did happen, then if we were ever to try to achieve a society that truly was, communal and integrated and like in all ways and fully intersectional in all ways, if we ignore those facts about the things that went wrong, we will still continue to cause harm. So I do want to say that, if you're ever looking up Neshoba, definitely look at it with a critical eye. Don't take my word for it. Like, definitely learn from it and just know that it has, reason to be critiqued. And so I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to be like, no, you should fully support it. Um, it was way ahead of its time. And it was a great thought and like something that was very powerful to learn and understand. But it's definitely colored by history in its own way as well. Like whenever it says a Scottish spinster heiress, I was like, man, y'all are salty. Y'all are real salty about this. And also they called it a plantation. It was not a plantation. I think that Frances Wright would be very offended by that word because she was specifically against, like, it was a community. And if anything, she would maybe say it was a colony. So it's one of those things where like saying that it was a plantation is also really harmful because it makes it seem like with plantation, we understand that they thrived because of enslavement, and she wanted the opposite. And there were not enslaved people of the community. Like they maybe lived in the community as contract with other like farmers outside of the community, but they were free on that land. And so I think it's just really interesting to just see how, it was tapped into that. Camden says, was Andrew Jackson the most notable figure at the time who supported her? Ooh, I don't know because I would have to look that up. You threw me for an awesome loop. I don't know anything about that because Andrew Jackson, from my understanding, is not great. So I would be super shocked if he supported her. So, wait, I don't know. I'm gonna gonna have to look that up. I'm gonna
I,
get back to
I I
it.
looked that up to find that Andrew Jackson supported her. So, and that's on some of the links I just shared, but I don't know if he's the only one who shared it. Why I accidentally shared the same link a second time. Sorry, I have to change a
Oh,
link.
that's okay. I love that. I love that you found that, Bonnie Jean and Camden. Thank you so much for asking that question. That's gonna make me dig even more into this. Wow, okay. So maybe I would definitely say that from what I have read, the other folks, if you're a big sociology nerd like me, there's other folks who supported her that I think would be like notable. But yeah, I think for like the general public, Andrew Jackson would have been a very, very notable person to support her. So yeah. So
Well,
I
and
guess
just
with
just to
that,
not to interrupt, but I did ask the AI on Google, and it says Andrew Jackson was the
mhm.
single most notable, powerful figure at the time who supported. Well, actually, that's not the same question, but um, you keep talking. It gave me wrong information. I have to find the right information.
No, no, that's so cool. See, I love this stuff and I love conversations because we can learn together. And I just, that's so exciting and interesting to know because it's another fun fact. Now I'll have to put a little picture of Andrew Jackson in my presentation at some point. So I love that. Thank you so much. Well, and I just feel like we only have 10 minutes left and I've taken up a lot of your time and y'all have been amazing, asking brilliant questions and being awesome. So the activity really was just like, if we had something that like if it was our future was our own Nashoba kind of thing where it's like how would you dream a future the right way? So like what do you think education would look like? How would we build interconnectedness as a community? What would it be like to live there? Think about gender, education, freedom, labor. And since I know we don't have a lot of time, I just wanted to drop that for y'all. So it's maybe just something that you can think about, something to kind of get your gears turning. But ultimately, I want to know if you have any questions because I just talked at y'all a lot. So the floor is open. I'm going to go back and make sure I answered questions that were dropped in the chat.
I have five beautiful names written down for people who ask questions. Ooh, another question's name to write down.
Is there an example of something that could have been influenced by Neshoba in today's world?
Hmm.
Ooh. Ooh. You know what? I'm not sure. I'm interested to see what y'all think about that. If anyone else has an idea, because that's a really, really good question.
That'd be a great extra credit. You're for the extra credit paper. It's not what I.
I will say I maybe can't think of, like an actual physical community that maybe was inspired by Neshoba, but I think that there's a lot of things that maybe were learned from it, even if no one admitted it, around human rights and ending slavery and how when people come together, they can live in beautiful ways together. Um, and to me, it was just like a social experiment of intersectional feminism in its own way. So, but I'll definitely have to look at that. Do you think Neshoba could have made a difference in racial equality? I mean, in my opinion, I think so, yes, because whether it was successful or not, it still happened and people learned from it. Whether they admit it or not, it was still something that was brave to try. Um, and so, oh, Camden says it says online abolition may be influenced by Neshoba as well. Camden, look at you just kind of, okay, Camden, next time you and I are going to co-present, or you can just do this presentation because you're finding awesome, awesome stuff. Um,
Oh. questions. I have to keep writing down people's names.
It's so good. Everyone's so awesome. Okay.
And I did find that there were at least two communities mentioned in the Wikipedia page on Neshoba. So there's at least two communities directly part of the legacy of
Oh,
Neshoba. So,
oh my gosh,
so
this is
Wikipedia is, of course, not an appropriate citation source, but you can go to the original sources and cite them.
exactly, exactly. That's where you can get your like information or the spark to be like, okay, now I'll go find academic sources. Yes, and of course, women's rights in general. Perry says, I'm curious if Wright actually approached this from a colonial perspective because Jackson's support makes me a little suspicious. See, that's how I felt too, Perry. Like, just in the sense of, I'm like, because at the end of the day, we do have to acknowledge she was still, once again, a white wealthy woman, a free white wealthy woman in the US in the early 1800s. So it's just one of those things where I don't know if maybe it was like, there's only certain things that she said or did that he supported. I feel like that was Camden just brought up like such a brilliant question that I feel like I'm going to go research more. But I agree. Like I think that connection is very interesting because I would not have ever aligned Andrew Jackson with Frances Wright until now. So I have a lot of learning on that.
Well,
Um,
it also speaks to the reality that humans are not one thing. We're layered
mhm.
aspects because Andrew Jackson, for his time, was very progressive. But in our looking backwards on him, he's not. So we have to think about in terms of the social location, which is what Mills talks about, of course, the social location of the when and where. And while there were things about him and any human being, none of us are perfect. We're all layered. So, not to usurp a conversation, but
No, absolutely. No, I appreciate that so much. Um, Absolutely. I totally, that's a very good point where we do see that throughout history, there's many people that we can be grateful for the good that was brought and then also be very critical and learn the lessons, the hard lessons from the things the harm that was done. Because once again, I do want to point out Frances Wright, there's no way she was a perfect human. There's no way. And so even like, once again, whenever you're learning about her lectures and Neshoba, definitely like don't hesitate to come at it with a critical eye because all of us like today throughout history all of us need moments of accountability so that we're not repeating harm, especially if we're wanting to follow a utilitarianist life. It's about, okay, how can we make sure that all pain is reduced and that joy, liberated joy, and Frances Wright's thoughts is happening. um, so yeah. Elizabeth says, what made her arguments for women's rights stand out at the time? Ooh, yeah. I think the biggest ones that I think kind of was shocking or like the most, oh my goodness, clutch your pearls, was the anti-marriage advocacy and her like free love advocacy, where, because there were women who absolutely were speaking out against or speaking out for women's rights and against the patriarchy at the time. But I think she happened to have some of the biggest platforms because of her connections to other people in academia, other sociologists, other philosophers, and being from Europe, already being connected with other people like globally, not just in the US. So I think that's why she maybe gets more of that credit of being the first kind of recorded person or woman to speak out on women's equality. But yeah, I think the anti-marriage and free love type stuff is what really made her stand out. Eugene asks, how do you think Wright would approach the issues with the modern public education today? Oh my gosh, I want her to come in and be like, everyone deserves public education. Let's fix this. Because public education was, definitely developed and created with a, you know, utilitarian socialist thought in mind. But I think with funding and the way that education is politicized today, I think she would be like, how do we remove that so that people can come together and learn? Um, because she really did see education as an absolute basic human right, along with things like food and freedom and things like that. So I think that she would probably be on a lot of school boards, and then she would maybe run for office, honestly, and be like, we're going to reform education. Or she would open her own Montessori school. What is one thing you would tell Frances Wright? Oh my gosh, Elizabeth, what a lovely question. That's a beautiful question. You know, I think I would probably be like, thank you so much. Um, we all have lessons to learn. Like I said, she's not perfect, but she did have a lot of privilege, but she still was a woman and like obviously faced criticism, obviously faced, different situations where she was in danger at different times as well. And so she was still willing and brave enough to not only fund these things with her own money, but to actively do it. She put the action to it, not just the words. So I would be like, thank you. Thank you for trying and thank you for everything that you said. Um, how would Wright's personal experience as an immigrant and outsider have shaped her views within the American society in the early 1800s? Oh my gosh, great question. Especially being Scottish and not English, I think she probably faced definitely some xenophobia from the US. It doesn't say that explicitly in the materials that I have read, but I think that's a brilliant question that deserves more research and study, because I think she absolutely would have been impacted by like Irish or anti-Scottish, uh, racism. Um, what do you think she said to people who told her that's not the right way to do things, right way to try to change things? I think she would have been like, it's the right way and used her last name. Actually, no, I don't know if she really liked puns or not. It doesn't have to be right if it's my right. But I think she probably was like, I can understand where you're coming from because in her lectures, whenever you read them, you can tell that she understood that we're all socialized and educated underneath these certain beliefs. All of us have been taught to uphold harmful things in society. So it takes time, it takes learning, it takes exposure. And she understood that she had a big privilege in her education, as well as being exposed to different people in different parts of the world. And so she really wanted to bring that to everybody and figure out a way to be like, okay, I see where you're at, but it's not acceptable. This is where we're going. And so while she was a little gentle, she was not afraid to call people out. So I think if they were like, that's not the right way to do it, she'd be like, okay, then what is the right way? I do want to know. Please tell me what it is. I think she would want to have that discussion. Um, let's see. Oh my gosh, such awesome questions. Camden, do you think that the project would have had a better chance really succeeding if more powerful white men at the time would have backed her, or at least tried to understand? Or would it still not have mattered because of the overall beliefs at the time in history? Dang, Camden. Wow. You're like dropping all the mics. Honestly, I I unfortunately feel like it probably still would have in quotation marks failed, but I do feel like there wouldn't have been as much danger, there wouldn't have been as much harm, and it probably would have lasted longer. And so, like, because the other reason why, she had to relocate people from that community to Haiti, is because their previous owners, even after they had paid their way out of slavery, were coming after them because she lost basically rights to them in that community ending. And so, like, people weren't safe. So it makes me feel like if there were more white men who had been aligned with her and the community, it would have protected her and other people. Um, but I don't know. Eugene, besides the backlash from the governmental forces in the US, was there any oppression onto her down by any of the churches or higher church members who disagreed with her ideals and how that may have affected her own faith? Oh, Lordy, Eugene. Oh my gosh, all of these are amazing. Um, and I totally hear people dropping out. That is absolutely fine. People do what you got to do. I know it's 7 o'clock. I'm gonna stick around with Bonnie Jean, as long as people want to sit and talk, but there's no pressure. Um, so to answer that question, I actually don't know a lot about. I know that she critiqued religion a lot, specifically in uh, it was mainly that she critiqued the church. And so I do feel like if we read more, we would learn more about how backlash towards her beliefs and like learning about how there were a lot of churches in the US that supported slavery. I feel like that probably did impact her faith and did impact um, how she viewed religion in general. Because my understanding is that she didn't actually really become known as a critique of religion until later on in her works. So I think you're asking a really brilliant question about where did that come from? How did that happen? Um, do you think her upbringing influenced or shaped any of her ideas? Absolutely. I think the fact that her uncle was a professor and he also was someone who was utilitarian and from my understanding was someone who believed that slavery should end, but was not like a public abolitionist. Um, I think having exposure to him, other scholars, other, academic lectures that she was able to attend, a lot of books, like being able to be educated is really what influenced her upbringing a lot. Um, Other than the woman you mentioned earlier, who in the public or political realm do you think reminds you of her now? Ooh,
Mm.
Bonnie Jean. Who do
Gosh,
you think, or who do y'all think?
yeah, I don't, I'd be curious to get the folks. I could think of a handful of names. Like I totally could think of a handful of names.
Oh my gosh, Jean Elliott.
Oh yeah, Jane Elliott popped in my head. Greta Thunberg, absolutely. I'm
Oh
thinking of someone who
yeah.
I studied and knew in grad school. Her name's Beth Ritchie. I just read a book called Intersectional Advocacy that is phenomenal for my other class. Michelle Duster, who's the great great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, who is carrying on the legacy of her great great grandmother. Like I could list so many. So many.
Wow, yeah. I'm obsessed with these questions. I am so obsessed with these questions. I think the last one that's in here is are there any other causes today that you think Frances Wright would advocate for? Yes, I feel like if she lived today, I will be super frank. I feel like, but once again, this is all speculation. Take what I'm saying with a mountain range of salt. But I absolutely believe that she would be someone advocating for reproductive rights, for access to abortion, because as someone who believed that anyone, including women, should be able to have liberated sexual lives, I feel like she would absolutely support sexual education and learning how it can be safe and consensual, and also like as healthy as possible. So I think that she would want people to be able to choose whether or not, you know, they experience parenthood. Especially someone who really critiqued marriage a lot as an economic institution. I think she would have a lot of critiques for how women's health, specifically reproductive health in general, for anyone who has reproductive health experiences. Um, I think she would be a huge advocate for helping us understand why people deserve access to healthcare and things like that. So, but that's controversial. Yeah, brave. So don't quote me on that, but that's just my opinion. Um,
It's recorded. People will have to quote you.
oh yeah, that's true. Oh, that's true. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that would be definitely one of her what she a cause that she would fight for today. Because I think that definitely it would be there.
Yeah.
A- Any other questions for Miss Madison today? Well, I am impressed with how many of you came and stayed to the end, and I want to thank Madison, and I'm going to stop the recording now, and there we go.